The OSU Extension Beef Team hosted the 2019 Ohio Beef Cattle School recently. This broadcast features Dr. Steve Boyles, OSU Extension Beef Specialist, a member of the OSU Department of Animal Sciences. Steve is going to address nutritional requirements of the beef female for optimal performance from the last trimester through the breeding season.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here this evening, and my focus is going to be in that last trimester and breeding season with regard to feeding these cows. Well, working as a nutritionist, I'm interested in performance benchmarks. I want to know what the current level of herd performance is and what direction, if any, does the herd need to move. Well, working as a nutritionist, I want to know what the performance of the herd is at the time I'm working with them. And this is a scorecard that I like to use when trying to figure out where the nutrition program needs to change. And on the left-hand side, you see score 1, 2, and 3. And as you go out through there, you see below average, average, above average, or what I'm calling those values. And so you could fill this out, 1 being above average, 2 being average, and 3 below average for your own herd. So you can look down through there. I'm not going to dwell on these. Even if you had all 1s, you may not be done. Then it's a question of, can we reduce the cost of maintaining those cows? So this is a long-term, needing some information to determine if we're going to change the nutrition program. And as John mentioned, in the short term, we want to look at body condition score and whether they're fat or thin. So that's going to be short term on how we're going to do things. So for me, the best time for a spring calving herd to change body condition is in the fall. Can we do it now? Yeah, although it's real difficult. As John pointed out, the amount of mud we have makes it a challenge. And last week, we had temperatures like -10, and that means an additional about 7 to 8 pounds of hay to just keep that cow warm. Also, it's just energy in that real cold weather. You don't need to increase the amount of protein you're feeding, just energy. And this just shows body condition and calving, and I think somebody else is going to cover this with more emphasis and more detail. But this just basically indicates if those cows are thin when they calve, it's going to take them longer and longer to breed. And also, to improve performance, let's get rid of the easy ones. There's a reason maybe the weaning weight from this cow is not very good. So certainly get rid of those with culling. Some of those animals, even with the best nutrition program, they're really not going to change their performance. And John mentioned feed testing. I really do love feed testing. However, many times I'm not given that information. What I like to do is walk around the pasture. If the manure is the equivalency of a thick pancake batter, that indicates pretty good forage quality. So you might walk around your pasture if you're not using a forage probe. However, there's on the right-hand side that I'm looking at, if your manure out in the pasture looks like you can make a wedding cake, we've got some forage quality problems. And maybe we're seeing more of that this year than we have in the past. But looking at manure is another way to evaluate the nutrition program. I like to break up the cow herd best I can and think about the different periods. A cow's nutrient requirements change 4 times in 1 year. And we're really focusing there on period 4, late gestation, and then period 1 from calving to breeding. You see the nutritional level goes up in the fall or near, say, this time of year in December. And then if you're a spring calving herd, then the nutrient requirements are highest during that lactation period. This just shows graphically that same thing. Now, here's lactation, very high when they first calve. As they go on, the milk curve goes down. Then they wean. They're in a relatively low nutrient requirement. That's why this is the best time to change cow condition score. But then about 50 to 60 days prior to calving, the fetal growth, most of the fetal growth occurs at this time. So maybe you need your best hay right here in lactation. You're going to need your second best hay over here in late gestation. So approximately 2/3 of that fetal growth occurs then. And the condition score of this cow can affect the rebreeding. Also affects the quality of the colostrum. Dr. Kiefer, our veterinarian, is going to talk about health. Sometimes when I, as a nutritionist, get calls about calves with a lot of scours, that sort of thing, that could be the impact of the nutrition program on the cow prior to calving. Because yes, that nutrition period affects the quality of the colostrum. So this just graphically shows that latter period of gestation and the fetal growth. Notice it is curvilinear. It really gets, that fetus becomes a calf. This just shows dam's energy intake the last 30 days prior to calving. If it was high, you get much higher performance of the calves if you look at these numbers. And I just mentioned the calf scour situation. That could be a reflection of colostrum quality or the nutrition program during that period 4. So in February, you probably, if you can, maintain the program. You may want to start supplementing some magnesium, think about a mineral program, and thinking about grass tetany situations. And for nutritional purposes, I like to separate the cows that have calved from ones that are going to calve. And I certainly think about maybe the mineral program or supplying selenium, vitamin E to the calves. I defer to Dr. Kiefer on that one. I like to separate best I can all these different groups in a cow herd into different feeding groups. Here's the mature cows in good condition, pregnant yearling heifers. They're still young. Then 2-year-olds that have just calved with the thin old cows. And then some heifer calves, they're going to have some discussion of that, and the herd sire. Maybe you don't have that many pens or that much fence. If we can have the cows in good condition as a group, then the pregnant yearlings and 2-year-olds and thin cows as another group. Sometimes these cows are the dominant animals at the feeding trough or the hay rack. Well, these animals don't get all the feed they need, so if you can at least separate these groups, that would help with the nutrition program. Water is still important. I thought interesting those pictures of how those cows didn't want to move away from where John was feeding hay, or those pictures. Well, we have to think about beyond just making more water liquid, make sure it's accessible to those animals, because they only can perform on how much water they drink. Forage quality affects how much a cow can eat. Cows in forage in poor condition, the equivalent of straw or low quality hay, and some of it we may have this year, about 1.5% of body weight. They eat it, but it takes it longer for the rumen bugs to digest it. Whereas if we have this poor forage and I supplement with some protein, I can increase the intake. Those rumen bugs need that protein to grow and therefore digest the product. Good forage runs through the system relatively easily, up to 2.5% of their body weight. I'm not sure we have any of this. I'd love to have some excellent forage, legume hays, but maybe we supplement with that some of these other forages here. And how much waste we have has to do with how we're feeding. I remember when square bales in Iraq, we only had about a 7% waste on that, whereas a large bale that's in Iraq can be around 9%. That's still pretty good. A large bale with no rack, the loss can be from 12 to 45%. And a lot of this is affected by quality. High quality hay, they're going to eat it up. You saw that increased intake, so maybe that'll reduce some of the waste. But if we have low quality forage, they can waste up to half that bale. Also, how often, let's say, well, we don't have racks, but we're going to feed the large bales. If we only feed 1 day's supply, maybe the waste is 12%, versus putting out enough hay for 4 days, they're just going to waste more of it. And there you see unrolling an estimated waste using that sort of system. Also talk about winter feeding areas. And maybe, if you can, move it around from year to year. This is building your soil bank on the farm. So here's an area in the spring after the winter feeding. This is an area about, well, in the fall. They did the winter feeding here. And this is over a year past that. So I know you may not be able to move where you winter or feed hay in the wintertime, but if you do, you are moving minerals around for the forages throughout your farm. If you're going to supplement, you have to think about how much bunk space. And I'm talking about in hand feeding. They might actually fight less with 3 feet of space than 6 feet of space. Whereas in this picture right here, maybe this is the dominant animal. I have my mouse rolling over it. All she can do is throw her head against this animal. Whereas you give each animal 6 feet of bunk space, this animal can turn sideways and ram into this other animal. So about 3 feet of bunk space, even if you have more than that. You may want to hold it to that with a hand feeding system. If you're going to put feed on the ground, I wouldn't recommend anything that's ground, but maybe pellets, that sort of thing. You can place a wire about 12 inches above the ground, electric wire, and then feed underneath that to keep them from tromping on it. And don't forget your local feed dealer. Range cubes, alfalfa cubes, other products like that can make an excellent supplement for your cattle. How cattle use energy. We often think about gain, and we've just heard about body condition. But the visceral organs actually use a lot of that energy. The visceral organs, the liver, the GI tract, the heart, kidney, comprise only about 6% of the body weight. But they use 50% of the energy. And then muscle, 41% of the body weight, but only about 2/3 of the energy. So this is the meat we're interested in beef production, but these visceral organs use quite a bit of energy to maintain the cow. I want to supplement, perhaps, and not substitute. Forage intake is greater when we only feed about 1.5% of body weight as a supplement. If we get very high, we start substituting, and maybe hay is still cheaper than some of the purchased products. Here's an example of how protein supplementation can improve forage intake. Forage intake of low quality may only be about 18 pounds, but if we supply some protein, we may increase it by about 25%, so the total intake's about 22 pounds. So we've gotten more protein, but also with that increased intake, we get more energy. So we get more total energy because this protein supplementation increases the number of rumen bugs. If we're going to use a protein supplement, call it, say, a low protein supplement, 14%, that may well work with a forage that's, say, 10% in crude protein content. And you may want to feed that every day. Whereas if we've got a forage that's 6 to 10%, we may want to be a little bit higher. Somewhere between the 14 and 30 you see here, and feed that every day. A high protein supplement, 30% or even greater, with a low quality forage right here, you actually can double the amount. Let's say you needed to feed 2 pounds of it every day. You could feed it every other day, 4 pounds of an all-natural protein supplement, and that's worked well in research studies. You can also use digestible fibers with these feeds. What are digestible fibers? Well, soy hulls, wheat midds work very, very well with forage diets. I really like to use those as an energy source with forage-based diets. They don't work as well in feedlot diets, but they work very well in supplementation of cows if you're looking, say, for an energy supplement. Finally, we've been fine-tuning how we supplement protein. We've been able to, or through research, they've broken down the different portions of dietary protein. So some of the protein in feed is degradable intake protein. And that's important. This stuff the protein here in the rumen and reticulum, the rumen microbes break it down and make it into microbial protein. This can go into the body, used for growth, or even back into the saliva as a source of nitrogen to also kind of recycle, if you will. There are other proteins that aren't broken down here. They move through the GI tract into the small intestine, and here they can be absorbed directly by the animal. Now, some of these undegradables maybe are indigestible. When I'm working with distiller's grains, I like to know what the heat damage protein level is. You can at least ask if you're purchasing that product. Heat damage protein is a bypass, but it's not digested at all. It'll just go out the back end in the manure. So that's something to check. But some of this undegradable intake protein can be used. This is some ration balancing software, and I want to demonstrate this digestible intake protein and then that's indigestible protein or undegradable protein. So we're going to feed a cow. This cow is 1,300 pounds. Body condition score called it 5, average. English breeding, medium frame. And then this is lactation. I'm guesstimating here that I'm calling her, she's producing 13 pounds of milk every day. The milk fat level is about 3.5, and the birth weight of the calf was 95 pounds. Here's her nutrient requirements. One thing I've added, though, is you're probably familiar with crude protein, so it's about 10%. I have told the computer I want at least 7 units of that 10% to be degradable protein. I need this for that supplementation to increase intake. Bypass proteins don't increase intake of forages that are low quality, whereas supplements that have high levels of degradable intake protein increase intake of the forage. These are the feeds that I've made available. Here's corn, there's corn prices there, but I'm going to look at a couple of these. Soybean meal, you know, is considered a protein supplement, and let's look, I'm not going to look at the entire feed analysis. I'm going to use my mouse here to kind of look at the things I want to focus on. Now, this is a 48% soybean meal, fairly common, and this is the crude protein level on a dry matter basis. In nutrition, so we can compare feeds, remove the water, and we compare them that way. So on a dry matter basis, 54%. Its digestible or degradable intake protein is 37 of those units, so well over 50% of the protein in soybean meal is degradable intake protein. Now, the other option I looked at was distiller's grains. And the crude protein is 25%. The degradable protein is only about 8 of those units. So a lot of the protein in distiller's grains is a bypass protein. Once again, it can be moved to the small intestine and be absorbed directly. So there is a difference between these feeds beyond just crude protein. And so let's formulate and see what sort of diet can come up. Okay, here's the cow. She's eaten her feed intake, total dry matter 23, total feed is 25.8, although my computer cow does not waste feed. So you have to think about your feeding system, how you're feeding the hay, how you're providing those supplements to minimize that feed waste. Here's the diet that came up. Here's the hay, around 21 pounds. Some distiller's grains is being fed, and then a little bit of soybean meal. About 4.5 pounds of this supplement is being provided to the cow. Just this particular software does price comparisons. It showed it didn't want to use the corn. This was the corn price. This is the opportunity price. So we can use some of this software to compare prices of different feeds to see which one's the most economical for you. this is the breakdown of the diet. What I'm really going to just focus on, here's the requirement, that 10%, and we're overfeeding that part, but once again, we have to meet those rumen microbes requirements. So we made that minimum of 7%, and so we have met that. So we're optimizing the protein digestion in the rumen, and we also are getting some protein into the small intestine.
Steve, I think you've thrown a lot of information out to them, and we've had a couple questions come in, and since we've got a good question that came in, and I'll try to accurately summarize it. We're talking about the cow herd now, Steve. If we are under condition and trying to increase quality, or I think they're wanting to increase body condition in this trimester, this last trimester, do we have to worry about affecting calf size? You talked about that rapid growth of the fetus, and if I remember my research right, the last 30 to 45 days, they're putting on close to a pound a day. So obviously feed quantity and quality are going to impact this, and my experience is weather, how much feed they're actually taking in. I'm sure they're eating more last week when it was bitter cold than they are this week. So what's your recommendation on that? Because I hear that a lot. I don't want to overfeed and cause calving problems.
Okay, well, one of the things is, once again, you could work with your feed company and seeing the right level of the supplement. So yeah, you can overfeed and you can cause excessive fetal growth or what's not needed. Ideally, the cow's in good condition, say that 5 or 6, and then all we have to do is provide maybe a little bit better quality hay, or maybe just a little bit of this extra protein supplement, and we're matching that fetal growth that can occur, that is going to occur. But yeah, I wouldn't want to feed 9 pounds of corn, especially if they don't need it. And yeah, you could have some problems with that. But we're just going to try to stay in sync with that increased fetal growth, so we wouldn't unduly increase the birth weight of the calf.
Another argument I guess I would counter with that concern, the audience member's concern about causing calving problems, is by underfeeding you can also cause problems. I mean, this is maybe not the right way to say it, but you cannot starve calving ease. There's plenty of research that's shown that if you underfeed the beef cow, first calf heifer at this time, you can cause just as many problems as overfeeding. So it's like a lot of things with production ag, it's not an easy, simple answer. Genetics go into it. Is it mating that this animal is going to have? Is it prone to be a heavier birth weight? If you've protected yourself a little bit, especially with the first calf heifer on calving ease, you shouldn't have as much trouble. So it's a balancing act, and I guess I would also, and Alvaro I know is going to talk about breeding season and impacts of body condition. So what you do today has long-range implications. Another good question that came in, and I am interested in hearing your opinion on this, is do you have any tips for not killing the grass under bales? You showed us pasture scenes where we moved hay rings around, but what's your thoughts on that?
Well, and the pictures, I should give credit. Ed Rayburn, West Virginia University, those slides of the feeding area, yeah, the grass was killed underneath those hay racks, but it came back. They didn't necessarily reseed the seed from those hay bales. Admittedly, this is a great time of year to go out there and perhaps seed some clover, maybe not real muddy, but you could spread a little bit of grass seed after you've done doing the hay feeding.
Well, I think we all want to think optimistically that we'll get some drying conditions, although I know that at least in southern Ohio, the short range weather forecast is for quite a bit of rain. So, and as a follow-up to that is, you mentioned unrolling. I know you showed some loss figures from feeding. Knowing what we've had this winter with the excessive mud, I guess my bias or my experience is it's probably not the best time in the world to be unrolling hay. Now last week the rules changed a little bit when the ground was hard frozen and the cows would not tromp the hay into the ground as much. Now I know we have friends around the country, there are times I'm jealous of the sand hills where they don't have the mud. They can unroll hay a lot more freely than we can in the eastern corn belt. Your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I think the big theme is we've got to make sure all the cows get access access to the hay, but also just whatever system you can use to avoid that waste. Maybe it's electric fence, you only give them 3 bales. Maybe not you don't have a hay rack. Can you use electric fence and let them only have 3 of the bales in a particular time during the day? But limit that total free access to the hay bales. I really worry about a lot of hay wastes that way.
Well, I think you brought it up in your computer program demonstration. You talked about your cows don't waste hay in the computer program, and I think that's a great point. I mean, the hay ring shots we saw at the beginning of the program, you see, I don't know of a hay ring that doesn't have some degree of hay wastage around the edge of it, and the more you offer to your herd at one time, waste is going to go up, because as much as I love a beef cow, they are fairly wasteful when you give them the opportunity.
Yes, and I agree. Ideally, a bale ring or some method that you can use to control that intake a little bit will be beneficial.
I guess of the questions we've had, I don't know that we have a good answer as far as repair. We do have some information at our beef team website, and we'll show you that address later at the end of the program, where we've talked about some of the strategies as far as interseeding. Steve mentioned frost seeding. This will probably be a good year to have a drag harrow to smooth out some of the rough edges. So I think you got to be flexible in your strategies, whether it's overseeding, frost seeding, interseeding with a no-till drill. I will say, for those of us who have fescue, it's a pretty tough plant. It'll take a lot of abuse. There's other forages that won't take it as much. So I know it's not the answer probably the person was looking for, but that's there are different strategies, and it's a year-to-year thing. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all.
One final point on nutrient requirements. Milk production really has a big impact on those nutrient requirements. So you probably need to work with the people you're buying herd bulls from, or females, on what their knowledge of milk production is. We want milk production, but we don't want to have real heavy. We only want milk production to match the resources we can provide.
Well, as we wrap up this portion of the 2019 Ohio Beef Cattle School, I do want to thank Dr. Steve Boyles for his contributions to this program. I thought we had an excellent session. But as we wrap up this evening, I want to encourage folks to go check out the OSU Extension Beef Team's website. And you see the address in the upper right-hand corner, beef.osu.edu. This slide kind of highlights some of the information that's there. Of course, many of you are familiar with the weekly Ohio Beef Cattle letter that Stan Smith puts out. We also have lots of information on beef quality assurance. We have a calendar of upcoming events and programs. We also have a very good library that has many excellent resources on a wide variety of topics. And of course, this video, as well as many others, are located at our YouTube channel. And also we have a listing of the extension professionals that are part of the OSU Extension Beef Team. So again, I encourage you to check out the OSU Extension Beef Team's website at beef.osu.edu.